asking a very interesting question.
Actually, she asked me why I decided to come to Ukraine. And then I answered, but while I was answering, she started to say her opinion, and she was telling something really interesting.
Who are you?
I'm Elena from Berlin.
And what is your answer to the question you asked?
Well, I'm looking for the answer. Why am I so interested suddenly when there's a war in a country I didn't know that well before? To see that the Ukrainians stood up against tyranny, I think this is a really rare moment in history. So I was reading a lot of history books when I was a child, and now suddenly you have a war in Europe, and everybody said the Ukrainians should just give up and they don't have a chance. But then they stood up against it, and I think it's kind of unique. So I'm fascinated by that. And you can go to the front lines and you can ask the soldiers, why are you fighting? But as I'm a cultural journalist, I don't go to the front lines, I go to the museums, and you see the same thing. Museums were attacked, museums were bombed, and the people got inside and risked their life for saving paintings. And you ask these people, why do you do it? And the answer is, well, it just didn't feel right to not do it. And you ask yourself, but why? Is it something in your history? Are you emotionally attached to the collection? Does it tell something about your national identity? What is it? Or do you have just the heart on the right spot? So I think the answer to that would probably be the answer to my interest in Ukraine, because I'm trying to find out why are there so many people who really do something without being told to do it, just doing it on their own, saving something, risking their life for the future of their children.
Hello listeners, I am Sarah Lepers, your host and the editorial coordinator of the Europe-Ukraine desk, which produces this podcast. On this show, we meet European journalists who come to Ukraine to report on current affairs and collaborate with their Ukrainian colleagues. There will be 2 episodes in this mini-series, and now you're listening to the first one. In this episode, you will meet some of the 18 journalists from Italy, Spain, Hungary, Germany, Bulgaria, and France who compose this new cohort of the Europe-Ukraine desk. They traveled to Ukraine in February 2024, 2 years into the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. For most of them, it was their first time in Ukraine and their first time in a country at war. We'll keep exploring the role of journalism in times of conflict. Some of us discuss the challenges of fact-checking emotional testimonies. Some interviewees question whether our presence here is even necessary. One of the fellows, Elena, a journalist from German public broadcaster, generously shares how she feels. You just heard her detail her quest for an answer to the question, why? Why did Ukrainians stand up against Russia's aggression? And what is it that keeps them going? As you might have heard in the first episode of this podcast, and if you haven't, I strongly encourage you to do so, the whole trip to Kyiv is extremely tiring. 1,000 kilometers takes you a day and a half. So after our train ride, we arrived, we met everyone, we had some lunch and went to bed early. It was the beginning of 1 week of meetings and visits in and around the Kyiv capital. One of the most striking moments of this week started very early in a minibus. It's 8 in the morning. We are driving outside of Kyiv and we're heading to a city that's 2 hours away from Kyiv.
We are going to Chernihiv. We slept not so much this night because there were a long air alert.
We feel tired and really maybe realizing for almost the first time what it means to be in a country at war, I think. I just cannot imagine what it is to be living like this for almost 2 years or 10 years in some areas of the country.
The voices you've heard belong to Nicole and Yera, journalists from Italy and Spain. I asked them what the air alert is like.
We heard, I think, the sirens at 4:30. So we had 30 minutes to go to the shelters.
In the middle of the night?
In the middle of the night, yes, exactly. So we went to the shelter where there were not so many people, I think, and not all the guests of the hotel. It's up to you to decide to go or not to go.
In my case, I have this air alert app in my phone, so which is like an alarm, a strong alarm in the middle of the night. So you definitely get really nervous. I woke up, checked my phone. The hotel speakers alerted us too, but I was already awake by that time. And well, I basically thought like, okay, what do I do? Do I go down to the shelter? I was definitely not going to be able to fall asleep again. So yeah, it's just like I wouldn't even know how to express it. It's like I was very nervous. You just have to really, you start thinking really fast. I just took my passport, and started thinking like, okay, what do I do? And I just decided to be safe.
In these spirits, we spent a couple of hours on the bus to our destination, Chernihiv. This city, located about 140 kilometers north of Kyiv, is closer to the border with Russia than to Ukraine's capital. Early 2022, at the beginning of Russian full-scale invasion, Chernihiv residents lived under siege for more than a month. From 24 February until April, the regional center suffered from daily shelling. It was important to come here to give an opportunity to our fellows from the EU to see for themselves what happened on the front line, where the Russian army attacked a couple of years ago. Our minibus parked in front of the local theater, a huge building in the city center. There we met our guide for the day, Victoria, and she translated the story of a local journalist, Vera, who told us what happened when the theater was targeted by Russian shelling in 2022.
And an interesting, maybe even somehow funny fact about the attack, that inside the theater there's a great hall where they usually show the plays and all the events happen, and there's a great old chandelier way in there, and Vera tells, and perhaps everyone always had fear that the chandelier can fall down one day, and the interesting fact that during the attack and after the attack it didn't fall, it remained there. Now it's removed because the hall is being on restoration now, but it's the interesting fact that it survived the attack.
After that, we headed to a neighborhood to meet with a local resident who was rebuilding his home, which had been destroyed in the attack.
I'm Aliena, and I'm French, and I'm a journalist, freelance journalist. I think the house behind us is a rebuilt house, actually, which has been destroyed, I think. So we are meeting someone who is rebuilding everything again and again.
We were at the tourist office just before, and they told us a story of people who lived under siege or occupation, depending on which neighborhood they have been. Can you tell us what you heard and what you felt?
I've heard stories of people staying in the basement with too many people in the basement, actually. They describe us children writing and on the walls, actually, and just for fun, because they were stuck in here with old people. There have been such a big project here by collecting all the testimonies to report on what the Russians did there, and also to prevent the next generation. So it was quite moving, of course, and at the same time it's crazy because those people are doing the jobs of journalists themselves. But at the same time, they are so good by telling their own truth. I'm asking myself how I can do my job here and how are we received here.
Because it's difficult to say that you need to fact check what they say.
Yes, it's difficult to say that I have to do my own job and not to fact check exactly, because most of the stories they collect, it was emotional perspective, so you can't deny the feelings of someone, but you have to check where the Russians have been, which proof do you have they have been here, and also what the other people collected and the testimony, what can be credible or not. It's complicated.
As we stood in the yard of this house, I handed the microphone to Elena, the German journalist who shared my sleeper coach on the way into Ukraine.
We are standing in front of a house I understood is rebuilt by volunteers that was completely destroyed. We are standing here as a group. There's a witness or a volunteer who talks about the story, but not everybody can understand what he says. So some people are regrouping, laughing, chatting. And I think when you are a Ukrainian, and you have the feeling that probably we don't pay respect to the thing that happened here, and I feel like a dark tourist.
I feel exactly the same way. I felt exactly the same way from the moment we came here.
Javor, a journalist for Bulgarian National Radio.
And I think it's completely inappropriate for us to be laughing and walking around. A man died over there, in that corner of the yard. The owner of the house that we're just trampling around, looking at this, having a laugh. I'm not saying we should be depressed or crying all the time, but really, a little more respect wouldn't hurt, I think. I'm sorry if this sounds aggressive, but it's the way I feel anyway.
I decided to ask the ambassador of Chernihiv, Vera, how she felt about it. I feel a bit strange that we are a group here visiting such a terrible place where terrible things happen. Is it not weird for you that we're a group of journalists here?
No, it's not weird, because I think that it's important that another country to hear our story. And for me, I'm a journalist and I understand what is it. I understand what's important. But for about another people, I see that they tired. Tell about this day, all days about this day, because it's very hard experience for me too, because I stand this, but I see like it was be in March, and I see this black.
Smoke.
Yes, black smoke.
So we are here in 2024, but you are feeling like it was back in 2022.
Yes.
This is what
Sometimes when I stand and see this, watch this place, because this place is very. As a big destruction is this direct, Bobrovica direct in Chernihiv, and in this place, very more people died here. In this district.
On the bus back to Kyiv, I sat next to Vincenzo, a freelance journalist from Rome.
It was a day with a lot of emotions, and we met people that are trying to rebuild and reconstruct the houses and what were destroyed by the shellings of Russia. It's crazy things that how these peoples changed totally their ordinary life from one day to another. There are people that had another work, another life, and they totally shifted. And it's crazy thinking how it's possible that we are in 2024 and in last years happened something like that you have an hotel, you have a building, you have houses. Our guide of today explained to us that the hospital was bombed, the pharmacy was bombed, while people staying in line waiting for to buy the medicinals, and also waiting for the bread in another bombings, and without military reasons, because there was just strike at civilian targets, civilian buildings. It's ordinary life. It's ordinary life that changed suddenly, and it's something that, for me, I'm from Italy. I experienced it, something like that, just from the stories of my grandfather that fought in the Second World War. And I mean, it's more than 70 years later, we are here discussing the same techniques, the same insane scenarios, and That's crazy. What I felt in these days here in Ukraine is the fact that the people has a strong willing to share their stories, what they are getting through in these last few years, and one of the things that I'm really appreciating in this project is the fact that you have time to speak with people, you have time to talk with them, to ask them questions, feelings, reactions, and so people are here to tell us the stories, and we are here to listen to them.
Elena was sitting right behind Vincenzo, and she still had a different point of view.
As a German point of view, I mean, we have a lot of Gedenkstätten, like we have a lot of museums at concentration camps, and when you go with a group to a place where these crimes have taken place, you need to prepare a group. You need to have a talk before, then you go, you have a very concentrated walk there, somebody tells you something, and afterwards you have a talk as well. I think to prepare a group is the best thing, and I stick to that. I think we would have needed some preparation, otherwise we are these kind of journalists who are not behaving properly.
Well, I think she has a point.
This is Angel, a Spanish journalist sitting right next to Elena on our way back to Kyiv.
But I'm also think that sometimes our societies, I mean, in our countries, they are willing to know what is happening, and they have their daily lives that they don't have this profound approach, and they want to know what is happening, and they want to empathize with these people. Of course, we have to respect them and to listen to them, but also it's important to be here even as a group and try to translate the stories to our societies.
Yeah, but we still have to check what kind of articles and reports we do, because there can be the point when they give us everything. They put their wounds on top of a plate and they offer it to us to have a story. And I don't know what they will think when they read our articles. Will we be correct? Was it enough time to research in the right way? Yeah. So I think you can also go there and just maybe not record everything, and then you can call them back, or you can have an interview, or you can have a collaboration. You can send an Ukrainian colleague, and then you are working together on a piece.
So for me, one of the things that I've been shocked is the way that a lot of Ukrainians that we have met, they talk about their previous life. So it's like they talk about the past, like in my previous life, or when I was to be this type of journalist, or when I was to be a teacher or a lecturer. So this is making me to think a lot, because it's like, are we in our previous life? You know, it's like, are we? Is this our previous life? Well, as a journalist, but also, is this part of my previous life in the future, if there is a war in a European scale? So I will miss this.
This night was thankfully without air alerts, so we could get some sleep. I hope you find these reflections as insightful as I do. Before, during, and after these trips, we journalists tend to question ourselves a lot. And it's not easy to question your own practices. It's why this project, the Europe Ukraine Desk, exists. And this is what we try to tell in this podcast. This is also what Elena does, our fellow from German Public Radio, who shared so many questions. If you remember, in the train at the beginning of this episode, she wondered, How come so many Ukrainians stood up against Russian full-scale invasion? How come they still stand up? During our trip, we had the opportunity to meet with Ukrainian experts who shared their own answer to this question. The first one is Volodymyr Yermolenko, professor and philosopher. He gave us his explanation for this resistance.
So if you take Ukrainian romantics, people like Mykola Kostomarov, they had some very utopian idea, maybe very utopian idea about not only Ukraine, but about Slavic people. So for them, the idea that in medieval times there was a state which was not centralized, which was kind of a very decentralized, was a very important idea.
Yermolenko is famous outside of Ukraine. He often gives interviews to international media and hosts a podcast in English about Ukrainian culture, literature, and history. We thought we'd let you listen to him a little longer as he explains a part of Ukrainian history from medieval times that he thinks sets the ground for Ukrainian resistance against the Russian invasion.
Why I'm saying this? Because if you come to people like Drahomanov, and I'm really very, very deep with you in the 19th century, because I want to show you that these sentiments are quite deep in Ukrainian history. If you look at people as Drahomanov, he would tell you that politics is about grassroots process. So first you have a community, like a village or a town, then you have a community of communities, which is called the state, and then you have a community of communities, which is called the international system. Now we come to the modern age, to the contemporary times. When people were so surprised when they see Ukrainians self-organizing, building barricades in the first days of the war, going to territorial defenses, seeking these horizontal relations, when these volunteer movements came up, well, it was not a surprise for us because we knew that it will be happening. It happened precisely this during the Euromaidan revolution here in 2013, 2014. We had precisely the same story during the Orange Revolution of 2004, 2005. And if we go deeper in history, we see that this grassroots self-organizing element was very present in the Ukrainian society. One of the reasons why Stalin decided to organize Holodomor in 1930s, the great famine which killed 4 million people, at least 4 million people in Ukraine, was that there were lots of peasants' uprisings against the collectivization and against the forced industrialization. And Stalin also understood that in the villages you have a big number of people who are actually not very fond of this forced industrialization, being dragged into the cities, going to the factories, because they felt they're owners, they felt that they form a community, etc., etc. Now, this decentralized element is very important for the Ukrainian identity.
So one answer to Elena's question is that Ukrainian communities have built resistance in history, as Volodymyr Yermolenko has just explained. I hope you're ready for another passage from an academic lecture, because I want to share with you the explanations of Yevhen Libovitsky. He is the director of the Frontier Institute. We also met with him while in Kyiv during this trip. He focuses more on sociological and political explanations. According to him, the Ukrainian middle class started to appreciate the open economy and freedom of movement after the fall of the Soviet Union. But during the financial crisis of 2007-2008, Ukraine lost 15% of its GDP, which is when Ukrainians started thinking about how things could be taken further.
That led eventually to the Revolution of Dignity, which is what is usually referred to as Second Maidan 2014.
Yevhen Libovitsky.
And in my opinion, this is exactly where Ukrainian agency has arrived on the scene, and that's when Ukraine became independent, 2014. That's when it became de facto independent. It was formally recognized from 1991, but the agency arrives in 2014. And it's a real agency, that's the real stuff. So at that very particular moment, that's when Ukraine gets its independence war. The Russians are saying, okay, you want to do it your way? Fine, but without Crimea and without the East. So this is where Ukraine starts producing the new quality of decisions, new quality of governance. That's when the civil society arrives to the scene. That's when independent media become more influential. That's when business becomes, or I would say rather entrepreneurship becomes a very important foundation for freedom.
Hlibovitsky then delved into another existential topic, trauma. According to him, there is a profound post-traumatic nature within Ukrainian society where empathy is crucial for social acceptance. And this might be another answer to Elena's question.
One thing that strikes me is how important, how post-traumatic the society is, how important, for instance, empathy is for acceptance. It's very easy to be accepted in the Ukrainian society regardless of your background. You can be non-Ukrainian, you can speak a different language, you can belong to a different church or religion altogether, for instance, be a Muslim. But you will be accepted if you basically fill one criteria. If you feel the pain of thy neighbor. If you are empathic to the pain that another person feels. And why is that so important? Because the whole nation is traumatized. After the famine, after the Second World War, after Chernobyl, after the hardships of the 90s, there was never a healing, there was never a therapy, there was never healing. So basically what would happen, trauma would be accumulated stored in the culture like we store energy in external battery. This very same trauma makes Ukrainians incredibly resilient. It goes on top of very strong character, which is the other side of trauma. So all of us, we basically have to learn to live, for the sake of the quality of our lives, for the sake of our sustainability, for the sake of our ability to withstand, for the sake of our resilience. We have to learn under assumption that there is a security deficit and understand how do you live, in conditions like that. So in a sense, Ukraine is becoming more like the rest of the world, but the rest of the world is becoming more like Ukraine as well. And what I think Ukraine's story is that you can, if your spirit is high and if you are strong from within, if you have a spine, you can withstand all these pressures. And that's what Ukrainians do on a daily basis, And if you go across the city, I'm going to have a great dinner in a couple of hours with a friend of mine tonight. But we very well know that, once we pay the bill, go home, there might be an air raid, and you don't know if you're going to make it till the morning.
This episode is coming to an end. But before we leave you, I wanted to go back to the discussion in the minibus. You may have figured it out now. The Europe-Ukraine desk is about getting to know each other from Ukraine and from the EU to maybe, at some point, create an opportunity to collaborate together as journalists. And if I believe what Yera and Mikol told me then, it's happening.
I think I could learn a lot from them because I saw a lot of determination and a real belief that journalism and that our work can change things, can improve things, can help people, and that's something I admire. And I think I could learn a lot from them.
Yes, I think that could be very, very interesting to collaborate with them, to discover more stories related to Ukraine, and also because I think that, of course, the Western attention for Ukraine is not so high as the beginning. So we are kind of used to what is happening in Ukraine. Unfortunately, it's very brutal to say, but it's what is it's happening. And I think that through collaboration with the Ukrainian citizen journalists, it's possible to discover not just new stories, but also new formats to tell stories about Ukraine that could, again, keep Western countries' attention.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We have one more where we'll go deeper into our experiences from this trip. Also, Elena finds her answers. This episode was mostly recorded by me, Sarah Lepers, and I must say thank you to Elena, who shared her recordings of Yermolenko and Hlibovitsky's lecture with me. It was written together with Daniel Bilyk, who also edited, sound designed, and mixed this episode. Proofreading was by Michael Bird. The views expressed by the characters are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the organization they work for, nor n-ost or the European Commission who funded this project. The podcast covering Ukraine was created as a part of the Europe-Ukraine Desk, a program that aims at creating bridges between journalists from the EU and Ukrainian journalists. You can get in touch with us via an email address that you'll find in the episode description, and maybe consider telling a friend about this show if you liked it. As said, we'll meet you soon in the next episode. Until then, take care, and thanks for listening.